Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Ganana Ganapatigam Havamahe Kavim Kavinamupamashravastamam Jyeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Shrinvannutibhih Sidasadanam Mahaganapataye Namaha. Prano Devi Saraswati Vajebhirvajinivati Dhinamavitriyavatu Ano Divo Bruhatah Parvatada Saraswati Yajatagantu Yajñam Havan Devi Jujushana Krutachi Shakman Nova Chamushati Shrunotu Vagdevye Namaha. Atuna Indra Kshumantam Chitrangrabham Sangrabhaya Mahahasti Dakshinena Vitmahitva Atu Vikurmintu Videshnam Tuvimakham Tuvimatramavo Obhihi Nahitva Ashura Deva Namarta Asoditsantam Bhimannagau varayante eton vindram stavamesha anau vasvasvarajam naradhasa mardhishannaha prasto oshadupagasi shachravatsa magiyamanam abhiradhasa jugurate Ano bharadakshine bhisavyena pramrisha Indramano vasor nirbhaake Upakramasva bharadhrishata dhrishno jananam Ada ashushtarasya vedaha Indraya unute astivajo viprebhis sanitvaha Asmabhis suttam sanuhi Sadyo jhuvaste vaja asmabhyam vishvaschandraha Pashayishcha makshu jharante Ganana antva ganapatim havamahe kavim kavinamupamashravastamam Jyeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspata Shrinvannutibhih Sidasadanam Nishusi Ida Ganapate Ganeshu Tvama Ahurvipratamam Kavinam Narate Tvatkriyate Kinchanare Mahamarkam Maghavan Chitramarcha Abhikyano Maghavanna Dhamanan Sakhe Bodhivasupati Sakhinam Ranang Kribhiranakrit Satya Shushma Bhakti Chida Bhajaraye Asmane Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi.
Namaskar. The Ganesha Suktam chanting was by Dorian Rayners, a student of Mrs. Shantala Sriramaya, who has learned chanting from the Veda Pandits Sri Chalakere brothers of Bangalore. Swagatam and welcome to all our esteemed speakers, guests and audiences from around the world to our annual event Namaste 2021. This is a global Utsava of Indian soft power brought to you by the Center for Soft Power, an arm of Indica, in collaboration with the ICCR. This is the final session of Namaste 2021 on soft power diplomacy. This word soft power was coined by Professor Joseph Nye, a political scientist from the US. But personally, to me, soft and power don't seem to go together. but nonetheless, it is a term that has been accepted and conveys the concept. India historically and traditionally has been a country and culture that has for thousands of years been open and has shared her knowledge with the world with hardly any expectation at all. Many are the travelers who have been attracted to India and still are for different reasons. Some for her spiritual knowledge, some to experience the diversity she nurtures, and many came to take of the wealth that she had, yet others came to study in the universities and centers of knowledge that thrived. Today we have with us a panel of varied, accomplished speakers, some who will speak on soft power diplomacy and others on various aspects of India that attract non-Indians to India and her culture and her heritage. I thank you all, the speakers, for sparing your time and so spontaneously accepting to be with us today. Now I'll hand over the proceedings to our young Varsha Venkatram to introduce Dr. Rupa. Varsha.
Thank you, Auntie. Namaste, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce a very dear friend of the Center for Soft Power, Dr. Rupa Vasudevan. Dr. Rupa is the Chancellor, Best Innovation University. She is appointed by the government of Karnataka as one of the top 10 academician executive members of the General Council of Karnataka State Higher Education Council. And she was also involved in the planning and implementation of the information communication technology initiatives in association with the government of Karnataka. She's actively involved in agricultural development activities and trying meaningful ways in which we can make a difference to our farmers while documenting best practices, traditional agricultural knowledge systems by farmers from rural areas of South India. Welcome, Dr. Rupa. It's a pleasure to have you with us. The session is yours now.
Namaskar. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, the Center for Soft Power Director, Srimati Vijayalakshmi Vijay Kumar, and her team, also her partners, Indic Academy and ICCR, for having me here. I deem it my privilege to be presenting my views on the education diplomacy and moderating the Namaste2021 valedictory session on soft power diplomacy. So first, I'm going to time myself, being the moderator and not a professor here, so I'm timing myself first. I'm here to speak about the education diplomacy, and I would like to go back to making a statement that India has always been rich with its knowledge, and we were always the destination for knowledge for all across the globe. And we are, and we pride ourselves of being the knowledge economy. In principle, one's primary individual capital is knowledge, and the ability to perform, to be the source of innovative ideas, information, and practices to create value for others, value for the community. Mere accumulation of knowledge, mere accumulation of skill sets is of limited practical use unless it's translated into providing economic or social value to a country. And it is this transfer of knowledge, it is this transfer of skill sets, it leads to economic growth that impacts society, that impacts communities, and which has revolutionized the world. And moving on, India's knowledge diplomacy history, it goes back to as early as a few centuries, because to the Takshashila times, when Indian arts, Indian culture, spiritualism have attracted people from all across the world. It's internationally recognized that one of India's significant global contribution has been the exercise of its soft power, drawing on its ancient cultural and civilizational roots. Now, coming back to education, 1970s and until about 1990s, we had a huge influx of international students. Why? Because many developing countries, they look to India to access development-oriented knowledge, which is in international higher education, research, innovation, food, agriculture, and science. Students, especially from South Asia and Africa look to India as a destination, Indian universities for graduate and postgraduate programs. Having said that, in the last 10 years, things have been very different. The annual growth rate and the number of students coming to India from the rest of the South of Asia has fallen from 30% to just about 9%. During this span, the number of inbound students from South Asia to China that increased by 176%. Our own students in the year 2000 were at 53,000 who were a source to the other countries, and 180,000 in the year 2014 to 750,000 in 2018. Since 2020, but international student mobility and educational exchange programs have been one of the key casualties of the COVID-19, and therefore the exodus and as well as the influx have clamped down. It has temporarily stopped. Now, and even in the past, there has been a lot of work policy-wise and otherwise encouraging other universities. India stands at 1,000 universities today, including the state, central, deemed, and private universities. So HRD ministry, along with the IITs and top academicians of India, have always been exploring ways and means to attract foreign students to the institutions of higher education. Now, these include a lot of initiatives like the international faculties developing programs for our students, showcasing the return on investments to institutions, coordinating with Indian embassies, and joint branding, joint knowledge projects to market India's higher education sector. But none of it has had an impact as much as the National Education Policy of 2019, which was tabled in the year 2020. The National Education Policy of the 2020, chaired by Dr. Kasturi Rangan and team, is a brave attempt to completely overhaul India's education systems. The policy has presented an ultimate aim of developing India into the global destination for higher education. It's like a Bhagavad Gita, which has everything. It has identified the standards of education, where it needs attention, right from kindergarten to post-graduation to teachers. But I will be speaking here especially about internationalization. Now, the policy has presented itself, ultimately to develop India in the global space as a destination for higher education for all the students from other countries. And it has a provision for foreign universities to operate in India. This was never the case. And as well as our Indian universities to start their campuses in other countries. The government has framed a policy which is by far the most flexible, and it goes back to the days when we were completely multidisciplinary and we never believed in the bird's eye view of a certain subject. And it seeks to increase the number of international students studying in India. The new policy also proposes courses and programs, especially in Indian knowledge systems, especially giving attention to the courses such as Indology, Indian languages, yoga, arts, music, history, culture, and archaeology, also modern India. Now, the National Education Policy of 2019 is aligned to the 21st century educational needs, but all the same remains consistent to the tradition and values of our country. Now, it encourages research and collaborations and student exchanges, which was not the case till date. Twining programs, the twining programs are programs whereby students can do a part of their course in India and part of the course in another country in the universities of their choice, and the credits would be accepted as is. Therefore, they've also created something called as the Academic Bank of Credits, which gives students complete flexibility to get in and out of the course, also take up internships and experiential learning while they are studying their bachelor's or master's program. They can carry research outside their institutions. They can visit, study, transfer credits, and it all remains in the academic bank of credits of the HRD ministry. Not to mention PM Narendra Modi ji's pragmatic push of neighborhood to extended neighborhood policy of the national education policy. The pursuits to fulfill the global aspirations as well. Now, best IU for that matter, I saw that we have a speaker here, a very eminent speaker from Israel as well. Bharatiya Engineering, which is a private university based out of Anantapur, Andhra Pradesh. They are in, we have an affiliation and a cooperation with Israeli institution called the Ben Gurion University. And as of now, our students are going there for summer internships. They try and learn the pedagogies of agriculture from Israel. They also go to Netherlands. So these are short-term programs that we have at the moment. But I think the academic bank of credits will provide a larger scope for universities in India, all universities in India, to go beyond the basic framework and regulatory authorities. So I think we know for a fact that international students can play a very important role in our enhancing our soft power. And with the national education policy, which provides for a proper blend of policies with a vision of a reformed learning system that can be an effective tool and strategy to expand and enhance India's power and position in different countries and regions. Both education and diplomacy are needed in order to achieve a more stable world. We all know this, and we as enablers of education, as knowledge, need to provide these platforms that offer opportunities for the healthy development of individuals and societies at large. So these are my views, and I think moving on, we have a lot of other soft power diplomacy shades that we'll be seeing in. We have our next speaker here, who will be speaking about digital diplomacy, and he's also an author. So I would like to now call upon Mr. Dr. Ilan Manor. Dr. Manor's main area of research is digitalization of public diplomacy, and his talk will revolve around public diplomacy. Dr. Manor's most recent book, The Digitalization of Public Diplomacy, was published in 2019 by Macmillan. So we would like to hear more from you, Dr. Ilan, and you have 10 to 12 minutes to deliver your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Ilan Manor, and I'm a digital diplomacy scholar at the University of Tel Aviv and a member of Oxford University's Digital Diplomacy Research Corpus and Research Group. And first, I'd like to thank today's organizers for asking me to speak at this event. In my brief comments, I actually want to return to Joseph Nye's original concept of soft power and ask, what do we really talk about when we use this term Indian soft power? So in his famous article from 1990, Joseph Nye sought to imagine how America would exercise power in the post-Cold War era. And power, argued Joseph Nye, rests on the ability to change the behavior of other states. And this can be achieved through co-optive or soft power and coercive or hard power. And while soft power rests on altering states' behavior through attraction, norms, and ideals, hard power rests on coercing other states through the threat of military force or using financial leverages. And I distinguished basically between two policies that could guide America's ascent as a global hegemon: unilateralism and sticks, or multilateralism and carrots. And Nye's main thesis rested on three arguments. First, that in the 21st century, military power will be less transferable, and we're already seeing this now. Military power alone cannot reverse the effects of climate change or halt the spread of pandemics. Meeting these challenges requires global collaborations fostered through dialogue, understanding, and public diplomacy. Second, Nye argued that the use of financial leverages would also be limited as the world transitioned toward economic integration. Indeed, in an interdependent world, American financial sanctions on China might actually harm American manufacturers. Third and finally, Nye imagined that new non-state actors will reshape the international environment, be it multinational corporations or civil society groups that address global challenges that supersede the nation state. Now, for Nye, norms, values, and ideals are as indispensable to foreign policy as nuclear arsenals and hedge funds. And soft power rests on articulating the norms and values that should govern state action and creating institutions that promote these norms. So in Nye's view, the International Monetary Fund or the World Trade Organization are both examples of American soft power because participating countries are required to adopt the American ideal of free market capitalism. This clear distinction between soft and hard power, I think, is representative of the blasé attitude of the 1990s in which Nye formulated this concept. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The world of mutually assured destruction would be replaced by a democratized world in which America's leadership would go unchallenged. But Nye argued that acting like a hegemon could actually be counterproductive to American power. Rather, America should embrace soft power as its main foreign policy tool. Multilateralism would be the order of the day, and through soft power institutions such as the World Trade Organization, America could make the world more American. The question that now comes to the fore is, what do we mean when we talk about Indian soft power? India at the moment is not a hegemon, and thus it does not face the dilemma that Nye sought to address. How can a hegemon best obtain its diplomatic goals? Through coercion or through attraction? So perhaps when we say soft power in India's context, we are talking about normative power, or the power of norms and values. For instance, nations associated with positive norms, such as human rights promotion, are less likely to encounter opposition to their foreign policies. Perhaps we're talking about positive image management and creating positive associations for India's global brand. Or maybe we're talking about cultural attraction and the promotion of Indian culture and knowledge around the world. Nowadays, we tend to lump all of these different activities under this umbrella term of soft power. But this is not the power that Nye originally envisioned. Now, although I'm focusing here on semantics, I think that concepts matter. Concepts help us make sense of the world and understand the actions of different countries. And the reason that the concept of soft power has endured for so long is that it offered both academics and policymakers a clear metaphor for grasping international affairs, a clear distinction between hard and soft power. And yet when we use the term soft power, we often forget that power is power. Power is changing the behavior of other states. Power is exercising agency. Power is forcing another's hand. And whether it is soft or hard, power is power. So I believe that the discussion on Indian soft power might focus on the future and not necessarily on the present. Now, although he was ultimately booted out of office, Tony Blair remains an adept student of international affairs. And Tony Blair contends that the 21st century will be governed by three giants: America and China, thanks to their military and financial prowess, and India, given its status as the world's telecommunications hub. And in this competitive world, nations will increasingly form alliances that are centered on mutual interests. China and Pakistan have formed a partnership to curb India's rise to global dominance. Israel and the Gulf states have recently created an alliance to stem the regional power of Iran. Notably, China and Pakistan's relationship cannot be explained solely by the concept of soft power. These two countries do not have a shared culture, shared systems of government, or shared norms and values, as evident in each country's attitude to religion. Yet they share an interest, and that interest binds them together. Similarly, as this century progresses, India will have to form alliances to balance the power of China and America. And this dilemma is closer to the one first envisioned by Nye. How can India attract alliance members? By coercion and military strength, or through attraction and the creation of joint mechanisms for global governance? Should India lead through a nuclear arsenal or through regional and global organizations that work together to advance the shared interests of alliance members? Here, I think, norms and values may play a crucial role. India's ability to attract alliance members may rest on the values and norms that India wishes to promote around the world. What does India stand for? What are the guiding principles that govern India's domestic and foreign policies? What kind of world does India envision in 2050? By answering these questions, India may be able to create a positive global vision that will be appealing to other states, which will then join Indian alliances. And this will truly be a form of Indian soft power. Notably, when dealing with soft power, I think we must take into account the impact of domestic policies on a state's reputation. This is especially the case with digital policies. India is known throughout the world as a hub of telecommunications, and India may be able to assist other countries in advancing their own telecommunications platform, thus becoming an attractive country for alliances. Also, through its digital diplomacy activities, India is gaining recognition as a digital innovator. For instance, the Indian Ministry of External Affairs has created the most advanced smartphone application that can now be used by Indians, Indian diasporas, and foreign citizens, while the Know India program utilizes digital technologies to connect second-generation diasporas to India. Yet India is also attracting attention due to domestic digital policies that include the suspension of social media sites and asking social media companies to block certain accounts that are critical of the government. These actions have attracted criticism from numerous actors, be it other states, civil society organizations, or networks of activists, and this has even been the case during the COVID-19 pandemic. Contradictions between domestic and foreign policies limit the credibility of a state, and by extension, its ability to attract alliance members. If India wishes to promote a positive global vision, it must ensure that domestic policies, including digital policies, are in line with this global vision. Notably, in the digital age, state policies are more easily exposed and denounced by global publics. And so domestic policies can quickly turn into diplomatic blunders. In a world comprised of three giants, the US will stand for democracy. China will stand for alternative and more authoritarian models of government. What will India stand for? The sooner India answers this question, the sooner it will be able to form the alliances necessary to obtain diplomatic goals in the 21st century. That, I believe, is what we talk about when we talk about Indian soft power. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Manor, and thank you so much for giving us your critical feedback on what could India do, the roadmap for our country in terms of positioning India's soft power. We now move on to our next speaker, Mr. Nicholas Cull, Professor of Public Diplomacy, Founding Director, Master's Program in Public Diplomacy. He's a founding director of, Sorry for that. Professor Nicholas Cull is the founding director of the Master's Program in Public Diplomacy and a part of the team recognized by the Department of State with the Benjamin Franklin Award at the University of Southern California. From 2004 to 2019, Mr. Nicholas Cull served as the president of the International Association for Media and History. His many books include Public Diplomacy, Foundation for Global Engagement in Digital Age, Polity 2019. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for having me. What I want to talk about is really building on what Ilan has said, and the way that I have sought to move beyond Joseph Nye's conception to reposition it suitable for the 21st century is to think not just of soft power as a positive, but a more broadly focused concept that I call reputational security. And I think that that is relevant to India for the reasons that I will now explain. So first of all, I want to say a little bit about my own perspective on reputation in world affairs, some issues for India, something on the pathway to reputational security for India, but also I have to talk about the threats to reputational security. And my conclusion is that this is, and here I'm in step with Ilan, that it is India's time to act. So first of all, something about reputation in world affairs. From ancient times, rulers have understood that reputation is an important part of statecraft. We see entire wars being fought when the honor of a king or the honor of a country has been disparaged by a neighbor. We see wars over things like insults to a flag, not because countries are insanely sensitive, but because rulers in the past have understood that a slight or an insult connects to wider implications, wider disparagement of national interest in the world at large. In international relations theory, reputation has been somewhat neglected. Scholars have tended to think about reputation in terms of how do we expect this country to react if confronted. Reputation is understood in terms of predicting whether somebody will bluff in a crisis. How will they react? Will they, under what circumstances will a country like this respond, for example, with nuclear weapons? But I think we need to go beyond this and think about how important reputation is in a global market, and look to the work of people like Simon Anholt, who've really probed the idea of a country in terms of a brand with multiple elements that have reputation and that are of great significance for things like exports, or some of the indicators that we've already heard about, like incoming students and so forth. It's of interest to me that reputation becomes incredibly important in a time of crisis. I'm haunted by this moment in 1938 when Czechoslovakia was threatened by Adolf Hitler, and the British Prime Minister says, Neville Chamberlain, how awful, how terrible it is that we should contemplate war for a far country of whose people we know nothing. Because Czechoslovakia didn't have a reputation, wasn't thought of, didn't trigger feelings in the minds of British people and French people, they were surrendered in the course of 1938. Other countries with bigger reputations received different treatment. I would think of Poland in that regard as being a country that had more resonance and a different diplomacy around it for that reason. What we're seeing now is a recognition of the power of reputation, not just from the positives that we come from soft power, but the negatives. Negative actors are targeting reputation in hostile actions. Specifically, we're seeing a lot coming out of China, a lot coming out of Russia. And that's why we need to think about building and protecting reputational security. In fact, I'm arguing it's the next phase in soft power. Some issues for India. First of all, you have to understand that world opinion matters. Decisions, however, politically are made for domestic reasons, but these are seen abroad. The pandemic has increased the relevance of countries to one another. We know that disease is no respecter of an international frontier, and therefore we care much more about public health policy in a foreign country than we did maybe just 2 years ago. There are increasingly global standards of expectation around issues like human rights, but also transparency in business. Special issues for India, where India is being judged by world audiences, include free media. As a great democracy, there is expectation of Indian free media, and as Elon's already alluded to, online censorship, but we know that in many places in India it's not a great time to be a journalist, and there are terrible stories in human rights circles about things that have happened to Indian journalists who came into conflict with vested interest. There's the ongoing problem of community relations and of religious extremisms within India, which goes against the narrative of India as a modern, forward-looking, positive contributor to world affairs. ongoing problems around gender, which resonate exceptionally poorly with international audiences. Problems with business transparency. There are some Indian businesses that have world-class reputations, Tata, for example, but right on Tata's website they have a statement that Tata will never take a bribe, which implies that the other guys will. And right there you have a problem in international reputation. And yet, as my colleague Dayatusu, who you'll be hearing from later on, has shown, there's great value in India's heritage and culture, which is known and respected and is a resource going forward. And I think there's great value in the diaspora, and this is something that will grow and become even more significant as Indians in the second, third, fourth generation move to positions of power. And we've already seen people of Indian origin as heads of government in Western countries. I'm thinking of Ireland, and I think we'll see more of this going forward. There's great value in India's global citizenship, and I think that it is absolutely right for India to pursue a stronger, greater role at the UN level. And I know that a permanent seat on the UN Security Council is something that has been set as a goal for India over the years. I think that is just the right thing to do, because that will then reinforce the impression and the reality of India as a global leader. I think it's time for what in the UK has been called a fusion doctrine in India's foreign policy. That is, understanding that military policy, defense policy, and soft power are interrelated, that you can't have one without the other. Soft power and public diplomacy are now part of security and defense and the protection of vital interest. And if you stress this when you're appealing to your treasury, when you're appealing to your parliament for a budget, you're speaking their language. For too long, soft power has been seen as an optional extra, a little dessert topping that the richest countries can have and the poorest countries don't need to bother with. That is completely wrong in the 21st century. If you don't have soft power, as we now know from Ukraine, you can lose a province and the world won't notice or won't mind. Reputation, however, can help, but it can also hurt if it's a negative reputation. You need to aim to be relevant to the world. It's great that you have wonderful things that you're proud of, but those, if they don't connect to and have significance for others, it won't make a difference. It doesn't help Taiwan when it talks about its beautiful indigenous calligraphy, for example. It helps to be a wealthy country, for sure. It helps to be a strong country, for sure. But it helps to be culturally relevant too. It also helps, and we've found that this is the strongest lever, is if you're perceived as being ethically relevant. And here India has had a tremendous track record. As a historian, I work on international social movements, and the influence of Gandhi in the 50s and 60s is tremendous. There wouldn't have been an American civil rights movement in the way that we know it. There wouldn't have been an anti-apartheid movement in the way that we know it without the influence of India. This means that ethical lapses are dangerous. The best foundation going forward for a good image is a good reality. I'm struck studying this by the extent to which international audiences are excellent judges of whether or not a country is doing what it ought to do in world affairs. Among this business of threats, we're seeing external messages crafted to undermine particular countries, but we're also seeing the problem of internal confusion and hypocrisy, where a country says that it represents one particular set of values, but it lets down those values. Many countries, India included, have genuine problems, and I think you need to start to think of domestic problems as having international implications. Basic rule is don't fulfill the stereotype. Really pay attention. This was a thing that came up for the United States in the 1950s when it had a racist reality, and President Kennedy, President Eisenhower realized that if they were going to defeat the Soviet Union in the court of international opinion, they had to address their racist reality. And it was a great motivator of American mobilization around the civil rights movement, and it should be once again, I believe. But beware of focusing too much on the self. Some countries become so obsessed with cultivating their own image that they turn inwards and talk about themselves all the time. This is the wrong way to do it. I think it's important to seek out points where you can cooperate for material and reputational benefit. I was very impressed that Great Britain, which is one of the narcissists at the moment, came up with this idea that Britain could be great for collaboration, and showed that with a project of collaboration with India. It's important to understand that human rights and security are no longer a trade-off. It doesn't make sense to say to the world, we'll give our journalists freedom when we are physically secure. We will have a fair and balanced immigration policy when our borders are secure. You are undermining something as important as your border when you are seen to be failing in these areas, and so it's important to listen to global responses. And indeed, it's a fact of psychology that we are blind to our own biases. So you will not be able to detect where you're going wrong. You have to talk to others about it. It's why, as humans, we have friends. That's a thing that friends can do for us, is say, you don't want to wear that. You don't want to say that. Well, it's the same for countries too. But remember, we're all hostages to fortune. You never know quite what is going to come up. For example, a risk to Indian soft power. During the pandemic in California, yoga and people in the yoga community, who'd always been, like, I think, a positive influence in American society, suddenly linked up to Trump and anti-vaccine ideas. And I think right now there are great problems in the American yogic and therapeutic communities, which are giving yoga a mixed image in California. So if yoga can have a mixed image in California, so you can lose control of an asset. And up till now, yoga has been a great asset for Indian soft power. My conclusion is that I think there's great hope in thinking about reputation and paying attention to reputation in the way that I'm saying, in the way that Ilan's been saying. Remember, we live in an era of global challenges where only global solutions will make a difference. So this is the time for collective work. There's great danger in the way in which media has been weaponized, and this is no era in which to attempt to go it alone. In the long term, India has tremendous advantages, and I see the diaspora and positive attitudes to the Indian diaspora as being one of the really strong things going forward. And I can see that we're moving towards what I would call the Irishization of the Indian diaspora, where they lose contact just through sort of generational progression with the day-to-day politics of India, but connect to a greater presence as a voice for peace and a source of foreign direct investment, as Irish people play this role now for Ireland, whereas 30 years ago they were more involved in, the diaspora was more involved in the minutiae and some of the negatives of Irish politics.
Professor, you have a minute to conclude.
Public diplomacy, therefore, is an essential tool for the 21st century. The first step, the first thing that any country needs to do is to listen, to pay attention to what others are thinking and saying. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to engage by email. I'm cull@usc.edu. I tweet at Nick Cull, and I have a podcast called People, Places, Power, which I do with the British analyst Simon Anholt. So thank you very much. I hope we all have time for discussion. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning, my time.
Thank you, Professor Nicholas Cull, and for your contribution, for your interesting perspective you gave today on India's path towards reputational security. I would like to now move on to our next speaker, Professor Daya Tusu. Professor Daya is a professor of international communication at the Hong Kong Baptist University. He was distinguished visiting professor and inaugural Disney chair at the Global Media 1819 at the Schwarzman College in Beijing. For many years, Professor Tusu was the professor of international communication and co-director of India Media Center, as well as research advisor to the China Media Center at the University of Westminster in London. Professor Tusu is the founder and managing editor of the Sage Journal Global Media and Communication and the author or editor of 20 books, including Communicating India's Soft Power, Buddha to Bollywood, the first book-length study of India's soft power published by Macmillan in New York, 2013. Welcome, Professor Daya, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very interesting festival. I'm sorry I couldn't attend the other sessions because of my other engagements, but I'm very pleased to be part of this final session and following on from two distinguished colleagues. But my take is slightly different from what we have heard so far. Also, we got some very good overview of soft power as a concept. We also heard from Nick about what India should do, for example. But I'm a communication professor, so my focus is going to be on how India is communicating itself globally. Where are the problems with that? And in the limited time I have, I'll just stick with that as the key point to make. I have a few slides to share. So should I do it here? Let me try if I can. Yeah. Can you see it? Is that right? Okay, thank you. So as was mentioned, I did a book way back in 2013, which was published in Palgrave's Global Public Diplomacy series, a very dedicated series to study soft power. And in fact, Professor Cull's colleague, Philip Saab, is still, I think, the series editor. And then I did an Indian edition of this book in 2016 and tried to incorporate some of the changes that had happened, especially after 2014. And as the title suggests, I was interested in communicating aspect of it and looking at in a historical context, going back all the way to spread of Buddhism from India to the rest of Asia and beyond. Arguably one of the most important and enduring idea to have emerged from India. The talk today is not so much historical, it's about what's happening in the world today in terms of where is the Indian voice in the international space, especially in this media, and especially within that news media space. Because if you look at any account of soft power, role of communication, media, news media specifically is very, very important. And if you look at the global media situation, especially news media situation, there's a very clear pattern, well-studied pattern about a certain kind of, it's not monopoly, it's a duopoly, a phrase used by a well-known British media sociologist, Jeremy Dunstall, called it a US-UK news duopoly. If you look around different types of news media, whether it's radio, television, news magazines, even digital media outlets, financial news media, etc., there is a very clear and well-studied US-UK domination, UK being a junior partner. And there are historical reasons for it, and that I don't need to explain in this to this audience. But this means that a certain narrative on world affairs gets circulated and privileged around the world. And narratives are always constructed, there are deeply ideological positions that these great media organizations take, often in an indirect way. So why does it matter? I think two words summarize the problem: dominance and dependence. The capacity to actually set the global news agenda in a particular way. Most recently, you can see what's happening in India's neighborhood in Afghanistan, and you could easily see that, especially in the US media, there is a particular narrative about what the US is doing or not doing. The rest of the world doesn't really matter so much, especially the Afghans. It has then the capacity to influence how certain parts of certain issues of the world are covered. Then that gets into the realm of geopolitics. Again, a huge subject, but I just wanted to point that out, that there is a deep and, again, well-established, well-studied influence on how certain regions get more prominence than others, and that can be ideologically driven, and sometimes economically driven as well. So the capacity to shape the space within which public opinion is formed, global public opinion, the public sphere within which these debates are taking place, is largely influenced by a very small number of hugely influential organizations based on certain countries. There's also a reaction to that. In the last 20 years, we have seen a kind of what I've called in previous study contraflow in images and ideas. For example, you have the dedicated 24/7 news channels from various countries: Turkey, China, Russia, Qatar, France, Germany, to name the prominent ones. What is missing in that is India. So India has presence in various fields, including entertainment, but in the news sphere, it is almost non-existent. It's ironical because India actually has a very old tradition of English language journalism. Times of India was established in 1838. So there are dozens of generations of people who are working in English language. And being a democracy, there's a tradition of debate and discussion. When I was a student way back in the 80s in Delhi, New Delhi alone had a dozen newspapers representing from extreme left to extreme right, a whole spectrum of ideas. Of course, that space has shrunk as in the world, but there is this tradition of a kind of argumentation and also a global understanding of issues. So you have those channels, I've listed them here in front of you. They're internationally available, but they have not gone really beyond the diasporic audience. The diaspora is very important, as Professor Kal pointed out. India has the second largest diaspora in the world, also the largest English-speaking diaspora in the world, and in certain parts, and I've been a member of that for 35 years. So, and London being a very kind of important center for that, I have had first-hand experience of what that diaspora is capable of doing as a soft power resource. In fact, in the book I mentioned earlier, I have a whole chapter devoted to diaspora. But it is indeed an irony that, despite all those advantages that India has, if you look at some of the major media organizations, Western media organizations, American media organizations, British media organizations, there's a sizable presence of people of Indian origin or Indian heritage, and they're doing fantastically well. That's also the case in universities and think tanks, and as was mentioned by Professor Kal, even in government. So what I failed to understand, I've been advocating it for now 20 years, why isn't there a discussion in India that there has to be some narrative building, and somebody has to do that and talk to foreigners, especially those who matter? And I'm not just talking about Washington, Brussels, or London, I'm also talking about Beijing and Cairo and elsewhere. So internet, obviously, the television hasn't done what it ought to have done. will internet make a difference? Now, India, as we all know, has the largest open internet in the world because the Chinese one is not open, and there has been a phenomenal growth. These figures are now we're talking about 700 billion plus, and they're increasing by the day. And there has been a whole project, the government and corporations getting together to expand this very, very rapidly. And given what digital world means in terms of communication, and Dr. Manner actually alluded to that, there is an interesting possibility of building narratives which are not confined to the legacy media, and there is a possibility of trying to connect those dots which exist across the world to create a certain kind of narrative which is missing at the moment. The advantage that India has in this, apart from language I mentioned and the tradition of debate and discussion, which goes with a multi-party democracy, is also the demographic one. Although it is one of the oldest civilizations on the planet, it is a very young nation. 70% of India's population is below the age of 35. You translate that into actual numbers, we're talking about 700 million people, increasingly educated, upwardly mobile, connected, and digitally savvy. So, there is everything there in place. I don't know why it is not being used to promote the soft power of India. And here is an interesting contrast with where I am now in this part of the world, in East Asia, especially in China, where I spent a year at Tsinghua University. And then you look at how much more advanced they have been in terms of digital technology. India has yet to produce its own mobile phone. It's 1 billion plus people. I mean, if they pay $1, that's $1 billion. So something is there that needs a bit of serious thinking. I'll just conclude with a few remarks about starting with the version of soft power that we heard a bit of that in today's session also, but generally accepted as a American kind of discourse, which has emerged in a particular historical context. In my book, I called it, it's an iron fist in a velvet glove, because US is a very, very important economic and military power, of course, also a formidable communication and intellectual power. But when you look at countries as complex and as old as India, which are civilizational states, a different kind of narrative is required, not only just to communicate it, that comes second, but even to create that narrative. That, there were universities in India going back to before Christian era. I mean, not talking mythology, we talk about historical facts. That there was, the Panini's grammar remains the most sophisticated grammar until 19th century, and that was 5th century BC. Now, we don't teach that to Indian kids. Outside India, nobody knows this. So it's not just, so there is a lot to say in terms of civilizational ethos and the role of narrative and communicating those ethos, not in a politicized, vulgarized way, but in a more sophisticated language that the world understands. That then leads to my second remark. There is a lot of talk about rise of Asia, India, China, etc. Although COVID has been very serious for everybody else, but particularly for India. Before COVID hit India, its GDP actually had crossed that of United Kingdom. It had the 5th largest GDP in the world in terms of purchasing power parity. It has been on 3rd place for some time. So it's a serious economic power. Now, that, if you read the New York Times or The Economist, that is not what you get. Forget about culture and money, and that's a different debate. Fundamentals. So what would be the cultural consequences of a civilization power when it actually becomes more vocal and visible and is able to create and promote its narrative, which would be distinct from Dr. Merrill made a very interesting point earlier about, you have this American model and then you have the Chinese model. But India always had its distinct model. Look at the Cold War. Look at the nuclear, plants in India. One is from Germany, German help, one French help, one British help, one American help, one Soviet help. Show me another country in the world which has done that. So for India to be distinctive is not new. It has been a distinctive foreign policy, and that I think hasn't changed whoever is in power in Delhi, because there are structural and intellectual reasons for that kind of policy. But, and this is my final point, where India has a very serious limitation is that until it raises millions of its citizens above the different ways, and it is defined differently by different economists, but the reality is that India is home to the largest number of people living in extreme poverty. And until and unless that is addressed, India's soft power will not be taken seriously outside India, even in academic seminars. So that then leads to this idea of actually reformulating the whole developmental discourse. That if India in a democratic setup with all its pressures and constraints and limitations can achieve what an authoritarian state next door has done, it will be a remarkable case for a different model of development, which is not based on the Oxfam model or the aid model which the West has been peddling for 50 years. And I think that's something which India has the capacity and has the intent, because this is something which stares them in the face, the policymakers and anybody who is interested in things, India and its narrative globally and its position in the world. I'll stop there. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dea, for your comments and for your insights on how India is communicating and how well it can communicate with building the right narrative in the most sophisticated way that the world understands. And very informative session. Thank you so much. And now we move on to our next speaker, Shri Sriram Vijay Kumarji, Chief Executive Officer of the IHH Healthcare India. Sriram Vijay Kumar is the CEO of IHH Healthcare India, where he oversees the operations of the reputed healthcare brands, Clinicals Global Hospitals, and Continental Hospitals, under the shared vision of becoming the world's most trusted healthcare services network. He's an accomplished business leader, entrepreneur with extensive experience in the hospital, healthcare industries in multiple countries. Welcome, Sriramji, and over to you.
Thank you. Dr. Rupa, I had a presentation. Will you be able to project that? Great. Maybe we can start on slide 3. So thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to share some of my thoughts on the medical tourism industry in India. So broadly, when we talk about medical tourism, we talk about health tourism, and it is essentially focused on providing a cost-effective model of treatment for those who may come from other countries. And there are roughly 4 types. There are patients who come for surgical intervention. There are patients who may come for some alternative healing. It could be non-allopathic. And there could be some that come for cosmetic or elective surgeries. And the 4th category are those who may end up coming just for relaxation. If you look at India, the next slide, please. If you look at the history of medical tourism, given that yoga has been around for thousands of years in Ayurveda, and Ayurveda has been a form of life, we have actually had people visiting us from all over Asia and the world from thousands of years ago, right? So if you look at Sushruta and the pioneering work that he did, medical tourism is not a new concept for India, and it's something that we have been good at for thousands of years. If you look now at what the opportunity is, next slide, we are basically focused in India on offering significant cost advantage in our medical treatments. We tend to be largely much cheaper than more developed countries. And in some cases, we are even lower cost than many developing countries. But what's interesting is that in the last 10 years, we have shifted the narrative from cost to quality. So if you look at what's happening, almost 30% of people that come to India today are coming because they believe that we have a higher quality of care and better outcomes. One of the advantages of having such a large population and so many well-educated doctors is that our surgeons are often far more experienced than comparable surgeons, even in many developed countries. Complex surgeries, in some countries, people may see 2 or 3 cases in their lifetime. Similar surgeons may see 20 cases in a year in India. So that makes a difference in difficult cases and complex surgeries. India also, the private industry reacts very quickly and responds very fast. Countries which have national healthcare systems, oftentimes patients are on a long waiting list. They find it difficult to get priority. Coming to India helps them do it quicker. And many of our private healthcare groups have actually invested in advanced technology, and that ends up happening quicker than in countries where you are more dependent on the public payer. So all of these attract patients to come to India, and it's a very good opportunity to actually build the brand of the country from a place of competence and quality. Next slide. So if you look at our data from 2019, of course, during the pandemic, this was grossly affected and it slowed down to a trickle, but we see almost 700,000 travelers coming every year, 650 plus super specialty hospitals, and around 40 of those hospitals are JCI accredited, which is the world's highest standard for allopathic care. A few hospitals in our network are also JCI accredited. And the advantage is that with these number of surgeons and specialists, we pretty much have access to every form of medical care that is required for patients. Next slide, please. What's interesting is that even geographically, if you look at it, we attract patients from different countries based on the cities. So if you look at the Northeast, we end up getting a lot of patient traffic from Bangladesh, Southeast Asian countries, and Nepal, whereas Mumbai gets a lot of cases coming from the Middle East, Delhi also. And now in the southern markets, we're actually seeing a lot of traffic from Africa. What's interesting is that we are getting a lot of students also who come from Africa to study in the South, and that has had a ripple effect even on servicing a lot of the healthcare needs. And the top metros actually account for the lion's share of medical tourism, because that's actually where the super specialists and the majority of the healthcare infrastructure is concentrated in India. In some cities, it would not be averse to see 20 to 30% of beds being occupied by international patients, especially in the high-end hospitals. In our group, actually, in a normal year, anywhere between 10 to 12% of our beds are actually occupied by international patients, and around 87 to 90% are occupied by domestic patients. Next slide, please. So if you look here, what's interesting is while overall foreign tourist arrivals are maybe growing at only 10 to 15%, medical tourism is actually growing at anywhere between 20 to 30% year over year in the last few years. Obviously, 2021 is an anomaly, and almost half our traffic is coming in from Bangladesh, but we are starting to see more patients now coming from the UK and the US as well, around 5%. So there is an opportunity to actually increase our value from countries that are further away. And what we are seeing is that the ability to improve our diplomatic ties, especially with countries in Africa and the Middle East, there is a huge opportunity given the amount of work that the healthcare industry is doing for patients from these countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, so if you look at this just very briefly, let's look at, for example, a heart bypass and look at the cost difference. In America, it's anywhere between $110,000 to $150,000, whereas in India, we can do the same thing for $7,000. It's almost 1/4, 1/5 the price even compared to the Middle East. And similarly with hip replacements and knee replacements. So the good part is that we are not competing only on cost effectiveness. The fact is that we are better on cost effectiveness and quality is definitely comparable given the kind of advanced infrastructure that we have, especially in those top 50 plus hospitals across the country. So patients actually see this as a big value addition because they are looking to save anywhere between 30 to 70% compared to getting the procedure in their own countries. Now, obviously, countries which have a very good national health system, like let's say Western Europe, we wouldn't be able to attract those patients. But there is a large Indian diaspora that's abroad that's coming back. There are uninsured patients in some countries. There are countries without very good healthcare systems or costly out-of-pocket expenditures like in Africa. And a lot of those patients coming to India is really a new lease of life. Next slide, please. So if you look at what the challenges are, one of the challenges that we have is in India, unlike China, we have actually built brick walls between allopathic medicine and traditional forms of healing, right? If you look at China, anywhere between 15 to 20% of healthcare is part of their traditional Chinese medicine. And many hospitals actually have a department inside the allopathic hospital, which focuses on Chinese traditional medicine. Now, the opportunity that we have is that we actually need to do a better job at combining some of our traditional systems with our allopathic treatment, and also in addressing the hospitality needs of patients in a much better manner. So if you look at why in Thailand people stay longer is, Thailand has high quality hospitals, but they have good hospitality. There is a combination of some of their traditional practices, and they're beyond allopathy. Though India also has a lot to offer, it ends up working in silos, right? So we are missing an opportunity to actually leverage on the 5,000 years of expertise we have in healthcare. Now, obviously, it may not work for all illnesses, but there is definitely an opportunity to do more collaborative work, which is something that we should do better at. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I mean, I'd like to just skip through this to maybe let's just go down to slide number 17 for a minute. Yeah. So if you look next slide, please. Yeah. So if you look at our hospital network, right? So as a group, we have a presence in 10 countries, 80 hospitals, 15,000 beds, and one of the best parts is that a lot of the work that we do is high quality tertiary care, right? So we were one of the first people to do in Western India. We did a bilateral hand transplant. We were the first ones to do a single lung transplant. We did a dual organ transplant. We have done 5 organ transplants in one day. And we have done also a pediatric liver transplant, one of the first ones ever for a child who came from South Africa in Mumbai last year. So the soft power of India is actually seen in the talent of our team and of our doctors. And we are providing world-class care and services which people are not able to access in their own countries. So to that extent, I think medical tourism in general is building the brand of the country. It is no longer only about cost. It is about cost and quality and service. And in many cases, the principles or ancient principles of treating our guests and treating the visitors very well is seen across the country in the way that we treat our patients. So thank you for this opportunity. I hope to see medical tourism continue to grow in India and continue to raise the brand of our country.
Thank you so much, Sriram Vijay Kumar. Thank you for sharing interesting statistics on India being the most sought after destination for medical tourism and our latest technological, infrastructural, and medical advancements. quality of treating visitors and patients. Thank you so much for your views.
Thank you.
We move on to our next speaker, also who would speak about something which is very, very close to our country, Ayurveda, Dr. Ram Kumar Kuti, founder of Vaidyagrama. He's an alumnus of the Ayurveda College, Coimbatore, and is the grandson of Arya Vaidyan P.V. Ramavarya, the founder of AVP Group of Institutions in Coimbatore. He's currently the director and trustee on the board of different institutions under the AVP umbrella. Dr. Ram Kumar Kuti is also the founder, director of Vaidyagrama, which attempts to cater to the demand of authentic Ayurveda, the traditional way, as well as go natural, the contemporary mode. We welcome you, Dr. Ram Kumar Kuti. Over to you.
Namaste to all of you. It's indeed a pleasure to be on this panel and to hear, I heard briefly the previous speaker and to know about, the wealth of healthcare that India provides the rest of the world. I also believe that there has been a session on Ayurveda previously in this festival. And I was just trying to think, how do we look at the soft power in India in terms of all our traditional Indian knowledge systems, not restricting ourselves to just Ayurveda. Because connectedness or interconnectedness is a key word where all our knowledge systems are concerned. The connectedness between man and nature, the connectedness between yoga and Ayurveda, the connectedness between the 64 kalas and the 14 vidyas that stem from in the Vedic lineage, the connectedness between the body, mind, and spirit, which enables health or disease in its truest sense. And this, I think, is a strength that we have let go of in the past couple of centuries or more due to various reasons. There could have been political reasons, economic reasons, social reasons, cultural reasons, whatever it may be. The concept of a holistic health perspective, a paradigm in which we were deeply entrenched, has now moved gradually into a reductionist physical health framework. From holistic health, we have moved into physical health. We have moved into an understanding that only medicines, treatments, and procedures, maybe a little bit of diet and lifestyle, contribute to good health. Whereas in the classical perspective of health and well-being, it also included dance for health, music for health, farming for health, cooking for health. There were so many different knowledge systems that were all connected in the cause of a holistic health and well-being. This is what we seem to have lost. This perspective, this paradigm has been lost to Indian society and global society in recent times. There is the concept of Shreyas and Preyas in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Kathopanishad, and in Ayurveda also, where Shreyas is about going inward and Preyas is about going outwards. Shreyas is about a lot of toil and hard work in pursuit of a greater good. Preyas is about temporary pleasures and enjoyment leading to greater suffering in the long run. In the modern health perspective, we are all well aware that the excesses that we engage in is leading to prayers and consequent disease earlier than expected for most of us. Whereas if we had followed Sama or Mita, these are all Sanskrit words. Sama means balance, Mita means moderation. These simple principles, while they may not be appealing in the short run, they stand us in good stead in the long run. And they take us on the path to Shreyas. Ayurveda has been all about these simple principles, so simple that many a time it is easy for us to ignore these principles in contemporary society. And the ignoring of these principles is a major reason for many of the health issues that we face today. There is another simple principle, not just relating to the individual, but also to the society and the global community. The concept of Dharma, where there are three words called Dharana, Palana, and Poshana. Dharana is the supporting framework, which has to be strong and healthy. Palana is protecting it, and Poshana is nourishing it in the right way. Now, this is applicable to the individual and society. And in the traditional concept, in the traditional context, wisdom, the Vedic wisdom, formed the supporting framework both socially and individually. Palana or protection was all about building the immune system so as to weather various external attacks like the COVID virus that we have all been experiencing in the last year or so. And at the social level also, there is a whole Veda that is devoted to protection of society in the right way, the Dhanur Veda. Poshana is all about nourishment, creating abundance, but not becoming extravagant in any way, individually and socially. Only when we follow these simple principles can we ensure health for the individual, health for the society, health for the nation, and health for the global community. And that is why Ayurveda tells us the concept of working with health starts with the individual. Because when every individual works with oneself, there is a rippling effect to the family, society, and globally. And if we can understand these simple principles, there are many such simple principles which can be brought alive. They have become, unfortunately, dead. Today, a lot of the Vedic knowledge has been consigned to doctoral programs, study programs in different universities, or they have become ritualistic instead of actually coming alive in our day-to-day life. Again, another concept is Ahimsa. Everybody talks about Ahimsa or non-violence at the social level. But what about non-violence at the individual level? When we engage in excesses or wrong practices, we are being violent with our own body and mind. And that is a big cause of many of our health issues. We can go on and on talking about different principles in the Ayurveda text, which are also seen in different knowledge systems in the Ved Parampara, in the Vedic lineage, all of which have this common interest of creating Sama. Sama is balance, harmony, peace, as opposed to Sama. Sama is toxic. We don't want a toxic society. We don't want a toxic system. We want a balanced system, a balanced society, which will move through the cycle of birth and death easily and effortlessly. The Ayurveda texts give another principle called Swabhavo Paramavada, where it talks about 6 stages, namely existence, birth, growth, maintenance, decay, and death. These 6 stages are applicable to every cell in the living body, every part of life and living. It is applicable to society, it is applicable to the whole world. If we can move through these 6 stages easily, without much difficulty, following all the good practices, abhyasa. I think in one of the earlier sessions of Soft Power, there was a beautiful interaction between Sashikala Anandji and Padma Subramaniam ji, where Sashikala Anandji spoke about Sapta Swaras in context of yoga, abhyasa, etc. And abhyasa is practice, good practices. If we can cultivate, inculcate healthy practices right from an early age into our life, ignoring a lot of what we are fed with. The modern society, we have an explosion of information, a lot of good information and a lot of not so good information. If we can instead rely on the wisdom from the Veda Parampara, consistently, patiently, persistently, for an extended period of time, changing the entire paradigm in which we think and live, then probably the individual and consequently the society will be a better balanced space to be in. These are the few thoughts that I had when I was thinking about Ayurveda and all of Indian knowledge systems. And I think going back to this paradigm or going forward, because time is cyclical, going forward into this paradigm in its entirety without taking bits and pieces is probably going to be the greatest contribution that India has to give to the entire world. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you, Ji. Dr. Ram Kumar, really enlightening and extremely insightful. I'm sure many of us here relate to everything you just spoke about and about the balance between the toxic systems and the harmony that we need to bring in. Thank you also for explaining the concept of holistic health perspective. Thank you very much for a really enlightening talk. We move on to our next speaker, Miss Wendy Burnett, who is the founder of the Nomadic Vegan. Miss Wendy Burnett, author of Veggie Planet, is the nomadic traveler, vegan foodie, and an animal lover. She's traveled over 117 countries, uncovering vegan treasures to show how you can be a vegan anywhere and spread compassion everywhere. She's also the founder of an award-winning vegan travel blog called the Nomadic Vegan, the nomadicvegan.com. Over to you, Miss Wendy.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you also to everyone who is still here in attendance with us. We've been going a long time and there's been so much great information that's been shared. I know it's a lot to take in. And I realize that your attention span might be waning a little bit at this point. So my talk is going to be a bit more casual. It's not really an academic talk. It is based on my knowledge as an expert in vegan travel, but also just on my experiences as a traveler in India. So rather than creating slides for you today, I thought I would just share some photos from my most recent trip in India. So I hope that you will enjoy seeing those. Are we able to get those up on the screen now? I know there was a little bit of technical difficulty, but hopefully that's been sorted. Yes, okay. All right, so it's not in any particular order. Those will just be running through on the screen as I'm speaking. So just to give you a little background about me, I have been, as was just said, I have been traveling the world for basically all of my adult life. So in the past 22 years, I have visited 117 countries on 7 different continents, and that includes 3 trips to India. So in total, I think I've probably spent about 6 months in India so far. Hopefully there will be more trips to come in the near future. Then I became vegan 7 years ago in 2014. And that was something that I had been wanting to do for a few months. And over the course of those months, I had been inching my way closer and closer to a vegan lifestyle. But one of the biggest things that had been holding me back from committing to going fully vegan was the fear that if I did that, it would turn traveling into a huge hassle. I didn't know if it would be possible to find vegan food in some of the places that I had already been, and also in some of the places that I still wanted to go. So that was a big concern for me. And I decided to give vegan travel a trial run. My husband and I had already planned a three-week trip to Greece. And so I decided that I would see if I could stay vegan for the whole 3 weeks that we were there in Greece. And I did, and I never looked back. I was actually really amazed at how easy it was and how many dishes there were in traditional Greek cuisine that were actually vegan by default. So I ended up discovering a lot about Greek cuisine and Greek culture because I was doing this research, trying to figure out what I could eat there as a vegan. And so it opened up a whole new window onto the culture, and I, discovered it in a way that I wouldn't have if I had just been eating what I had eaten before that. So not only did becoming vegan not ruin my travels, it actually enriched them and made them even more enjoyable in a lot of ways, which was a big surprise to me. So as soon as I got home, I created my blog, The Nomadic Vegan, to spread this news and to show people who probably had the same fears and misconceptions that I had once had, that yes, you can actually be vegan anywhere. That being said, it is true that it is easier in some places than in others. And India is one of the easier places in the whole world to be vegan. I'd say it's definitely the best country in the world to be a vegetarian. So you're already most of the way there in terms of catering to the needs of vegan travelers. In other countries, vegan travelers often have to ask a lot of questions and do a fair bit of investigating to make sure that there are no hidden animal products in their food. For example, soups may appear vegan when actually they're made with chicken stock or some other kind of meat or fish stock. In Thailand, a veg curry might look vegan, but actually the curry sauce has shrimp paste in it. Or in Japan, there are loads and loads of dishes in Japanese cuisine that seem like they should be vegan, including things like tofu dishes. And tofu is something that in my culture in the West, we associate with vegetarianism and veganism. But in East Asia, that's not the case. So you may very well have tofu and meat mixed together in the same dish there. And in fact, in Japan, there are entire restaurants that specialize in tofu. Everything on the menu is made with tofu, but at the same time, everything on the menu also has dashi in it. And dashi is a fish stock that's very common in Japanese cuisine. And most soups and sauces will include dashi in it. So it might be hard to believe that in a tofu restaurant, you wouldn't be able to find anything vegan, but that it's true. It happened to me personally while I was traveling in Japan. In India, things like that do not happen. There are so many animal-based ingredients that vegans in India never have to worry about, because virtually any restaurant in India, if it's not already a pure veg restaurant, it will at least have a large vegetarian section included in the menu. And vegetarianism is, of course, very well understood by all restaurant staff there. So you can be confident that the dishes in the vegetarian section of the menu do not contain anything made with meat or fish or even eggs. And that final point, eggs, is really important because that's not the case in most other countries. Usually eggs are considered to be vegetarian. So if you saw something that was listed as vegetarian, you would still need to ask, oh, but does it have eggs in it? But in India, it's really easy to avoid eggs as well. So as a vegan, the only ingredients that you need to watch out for in India are the dairy-based ingredients. and that's milk, curd, paneer, ghee, etc. I guess I didn't explain what vegan is. So if you're not familiar with the term, it means that you don't eat any animal products at all. So no animals, and also nothing that came from an animal, which would be eggs or milk or honey. Some vegans would eat honey, but others would not. So yeah, in India, it's really just the dairy and then possibly the honey, depending on your views on that. So this can be a little bit tricky because in my experience, when I've eaten in Indian restaurants, staff have usually not been familiar with the word vegan or really with the concept of not eating dairy, because it is a big part of the culture. So in the US or Europe, for example, there are lots of people who don't consume dairy. It's not just vegans. Milk is a very common allergen. So lots of people are lactose intolerant, and it's common for them to ask for a dairy-free meal in a restaurant. And usually that would be all you would have to say. You would just say, I'd like a dairy-free meal, and they would understand which products are included in that umbrella term of dairy products. In India, in the past, I have found that that wasn't necessarily the case, and that I did need to list all of the different ingredients and ask, does it have ghee in it? And if it does, can you make it with oil instead of ghee, please? Then does it have milk? Does it have paneer, curd, etc.? But I have been talking recently to people who are living in India now about this, and they've told me that the awareness of veganism is really growing just recently in the past 2 or 3 years, and that vegan alternatives to milk and cheese and various dairy products are now widely available. And for example, it's apparently pretty common for restaurants to offer tofu in place of paneer in dishes like saag paneer. So that's really exciting, because that's not something that I remember seeing in India in the past. Of course, I have not been able to get back to India during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the last time that I was there was in late 2019, when I had the pleasure of co-leading a trip to southern India in collaboration with a company called Escape 2, and they specialize in vegan travel to the Indian subcontinent. So the photos that you've been seeing are photos from that trip, and I can tell you that the participants on that trip, all of whom were vegan, were absolutely thrilled both with the food and with the cultural experience of being in India. So for example, you might have seen there's a photo of the girls showing off the henna tattoos that they got while they were there during the trip. And even something as commonplace as riding in an auto rickshaw, that was a real adventure for them. They really loved it. So India really does have so much to offer as a tourism destination, both in terms of outstanding tourism sites like the Taj Mahal or the Red Fort, but also just the daily life in India is really fascinating for Western visitors. And on the trips organized by Escape 2, the company arranges some incredible experiences. So the guests do have the opportunity to meet locals and learn even more about what life is like in India. For example, we visited local artisans and local community empowerment projects. We met with the founders and staff of a local company called Good Milk in Bangalore that makes vegan dairy alternatives. And we also had dinner with a local family who invited us into their home and cooked a dinner for us that was, of course, all vegan. So India really has the full package, and especially when it comes to appealing to the vegetarian and vegan market, which is a very rapidly expanding market. India has an edge over most other countries in the world, but I don't really see this being highlighted very much when it comes to how India is promoted as a tourism destination. What's highlighted tends to be the cultural offering, but the cuisine, and particularly the vegetarian and vegan cuisine, often gets overlooked. So I see that as a missed opportunity, and I hope that in the future, those who are promoting India will showcase its vegan-friendly cuisine. And I also hope that at the more grassroots level, the restaurants will educate their staff about the needs of vegan clientele, and perhaps start offering more substitutes. For example, by saying that they can make a saag paneer with tofu instead of paneer, or saying they could make navratan korma with a soy-based cream or a coconut-based cream instead of a dairy cream. And maybe make vegan options on the menu marked with a special icon so that vegan customers can see right away that there are vegan options and that the restaurant understands what vegan means, because that will really make them feel more at ease. So the vegan movement is growing exponentially, both in India and in the countries where tourists in India typically come from, specifically the United States, the UK, Australia, and many European countries as well. So India is in an excellent position to attract these vegan tourists if it is marketed in the right way.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wendy. That was such a beautiful, colorful cultural tour and culinary tour that you took us through. Very interesting. Thank you so much. And here we come to the end of our session. I have a few questions that are there for a few of the speakers, and I'll take it one after the other. The first question is from Padmanabhan Krishnaswamy, and it is for Dr. Professor Kal, and he wants to know about the religious extremism. Can you expand that?
Certainly. Well, my view is that religious extremism always plays badly internationally. So if you care about your image, you need to moderate extreme religious positions within your country. And for India, I think this comes up regularly, both in minority behaviors and the problems with internal terrorism, but also in majority community behavior and in abuse perpetrated by religious specialists. These are the problem is, and this goes to Daya's discussion of the global media, that once the global media has a story in its mind, it has like a little box, and it puts new things into the box. It keeps that perspective alive in front of an international audience, and religious extremism is an ongoing problem in the international perception of India. And I know it's hard to eliminate or guide an element of mass behavior, and that's why I think that the attitude of political elites and leaders is especially important. And I don't want to get into specific stories, political parties or politicians, but look, just one story. When India has spent 7 decades or more talking about Gandhi and the virtues that come from Gandhi, the gift that Gandhi was to the world, it's very shocking to learn that there are people in Indian public life who want to memorialize and valorize his murderer. And I expect that, and it's been good to see that there are people in India who say, no, you can't do that, or no, you shouldn't do that. That's inappropriate to rename a town after him, rename a town after Godse, for example. And I suspect that the answer is in addressing the inequalities that Professor Tusud spoke of. There's a saying that comes actually from a Roman poet, Ovid, that in prosperity no altars smoke, meaning that religious extremes of religious expression, are linked to economic difficulty and economic inequality. And perhaps the way to handle these problems and to take the edge off religious extremes is to address the social difficulties. So that's what I'm getting to, but I think that religious life in India, unfortunately, is a double-edged sword, and it's both a great blessing and a great strength, but in extreme forms it is off-putting and is a weakness in the global perception of Indian life. And I'm not saying anybody's extremism is off-putting to people who are not of that community.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your views. My next question goes to Dr. Ilan Manor, and this is about hacking, actually. So hacking, we know, it has turned many cyber optimists into cyber pessimists. And even, it's considered as the main risk of digital diplomacy because many heads of states, governments, and diplomats around the world have been its victims. Now, which has rarely jeopardized their career, but diplomatic rivals, including state and non-state actors, try to attack governmental systems in order to extract information that would serve them for certain purposes. What do you have to say about this side of digitalization? So maybe.
Yes. Well, I don't know if I'm a cyber optimist or a cyber pessimist or a cyber realist. But definitely one of the contemporary issues in digital diplomacy studies is cyber diplomacy and how states can either launch cyber attacks or how you defend yourself against cyber attacks. I think this is interesting in the Indian context because India is trying to position itself as a country that is synonymous with digital innovation. And you have countries that have digital vulnerabilities. So if I was talking earlier about ways in which India could become an attractive partner in international alliances, cyber capabilities is one of those tickets. And one of the Baltic states that was attacked in 2014 by Russia in a massive attack has actually completely relocated all of its national infrastructure, computer infrastructure, to an undisclosed third location. So we really have countries that have digital vulnerabilities and they are looking for ways to overcome these vulnerabilities. And one of the things that India can offer its strategic allies is advanced cyber capabilities and being able to deter or deflect cyber offenses when they come. And this can range from anything from hacking into private corporations and trying to steal patents to hacking into national databases and trying to extract information about the health and the health of various citizens. So I actually think that this is a positive aspect if you look at it from the strategic lens that India can try to capitalize on.
Would Professor Daya like to add anything to this, please?
Thank you. I do agree with Dr. Manner's proposition, but the infrastructure in India still needs a lot of strengthening and upgrading. There is enormous potential. I mean, there's human resources, great universities, research institutions, huge connection with top institutions, especially in the United States. There are also political and strategic links, economic links. So the potential is all there, but its execution still requires a lot more practical thinking. I do feel that, as I said in my initial remarks, India has not been able to produce its own mobile phone. I mean, I find astonishing because it has 1.3 billion people. How is it that China did it in 10 years? Now 70% of the smartphone market in India is Chinese phones. There are all kinds of issues, surveillance, security, given the political situation between the two countries. So I think that requires so of course there is potential, but it has not been exercised to the extent it has to be exercised. It needs resource mobilization. It needs a much more direct public-private and global consortium. That's beginning to happen. We've seen in the case of Jio in India, which has shown phenomenal growth in the last 5 years. And it also has direct connections with Google and Facebook, etc. So there is that kind of alliance already emerging, but we are still doing work for third party. This is what the Chinese did 20 years ago. The point is, when will India have its own Google, its own Facebook, its own Twitter? I mean, it has the largest audience for both Facebook and WhatsApp in the world, and growing. As mentioned earlier, the demographics is in favor of India. So and there's a very active state intervention. The government, particularly in recent years, Mr. Modi is personally and I think politically very engaged with it. So I really find it very hard to see why isn't it happening, despite all the right ingredients, whether it is at the policy level or even financially and globally. So I think absolutely, it's high time that that was done.
Okay, thank you for your inputs, Professor. I would like to ask my next question to Shri Sriram Vijay Kumarji. Sriram, so although we are vouching on the quality of our doctors, our surgery, our procedures, our infrastructure, there is still a lot of resistance in dealing, in people's minds, which says, will my medical travel to India not compromise quality for just a better price? So would you like to expand on this, please?
Sure. So I think definitely if you look at this situation 15 years ago or 20 years ago, a lot of the highest quality medical outcomes actually happened in quasi-governmental institutions or in medical colleges, for example, in AIIMS in Delhi or in CMC in Vellore. And in these institutions or in SGPJ in Lucknow, these institutions, while they had high quality clinical outcomes and academicians, they lacked the service standards to appeal to an international clientele, right? We did not have the infrastructure. We did not have high standards of cleanliness or good quality rooms or infrastructure. And the narrative was very difficult then to sell. But if you look at the last 15 years, if you look at Fortis or Apollo or our group or the Reliance Hospital in Mumbai, these facilities are class leading. So right from an infrastructure, look and feel, service, having international food available, having the comforts taken care of, all of the softer infrastructure needed to serve patients starts to exist. And along with that, you also have groups that have invested in the right quality of equipment and the right level of technology in each of these hospitals. And the good news is that over the last, I would say at least 5 years, you're seeing a lot of our hospitals start to publish their results in domestic and international journals, whether it's our outcomes for cardiac surgeries or transplants. Many of our outcomes are class leading. So I think the data has improved and patient testimonials have started to matter. And with the growth of the internet, you're also seeing many patients speak openly about their experience in Indian hospitals. And I think that has actually helped in improving the brand because you're seeing a lot of patients being at the front lines of actually promoting their experience. That doesn't mean every experience is perfect, of course, but largely the positive experiences outweigh the negative. And that's why we're seeing this start to grow so quickly.
Yes. Thank you, Sriram, for this input. Now, I would like to ask the last question to Dr. Ram Kumarji. Now, why is it that when we speak about Ayurveda, we think of Kerala and everything related to Ayurveda, we say Kerala is emerging as the key Ayurveda medical tourism hub. Isn't the entire country rich with this knowledge, and why is Kerala the destination?
Absolutely. Ayurveda, the initial texts of Ayurveda were composed in the Himalayas. So definitely the whole of India has a very rich Ayurveda tradition. There are many Ayurveda schools and hospitals and doctors in all parts of India, perhaps even outnumbering Kerala. But what Kerala did is, one is it was able to maintain the lineage of practice of authentic Ayurveda through all the difficult, past, the historical situations that we have been through in the last 300, 400 years. Kerala was able to retain the authentic traditions of Ayurveda. And further, in the last 30 years, Kerala has promoted Ayurveda very intelligently as compared to the rest of India. Kerala started promoting Ayurveda globally much before the rest of India actually started doing it. But otherwise, I think, the rich Ayurveda tradition, as you rightly said, exists all over the country. And there's still a lot that remains to be discovered in these traditions.
Thank you. Yes, definitely Kerala is doing something right. And that's why when we speak of Ayurveda, it is Kerala that is spoken of. My last question is for Ms. Wendy Gurney. And we'll wind up after that. And if panelists have anything to ask the other speakers, they are open to do so. Wendy, vegetarianism and veganism, they're compared at a lot of in a lot of platforms. And while vegetarian is plant-based whole food diet, there is a school of thought which speaks of vegans being deprived of the omega-3 acids or vegetable oils, nuts. Do you think that's a matter of concern?
Well, you can absolutely have a healthy vegan diet, but you can also have a very unhealthy vegan diet. I could live off of Coca-Cola and potato chips, and technically that would be vegan, but I definitely wouldn't be getting all of the nutrients that I needed. A whole foods plant-based diet is a very healthy one, and there is only one vitamin or mineral that really needs to be supplemented that does not come from plants, and that's B12. So I do take B12 supplements myself, and I recommend that every vegan do that. Yeah, omega-3s, that's something that you might want to do as well, but I would say that there are plant-based sources of that. So it depends on, whether you're eating those specific plant foods that include those omega-3s on a regular basis or not. Yeah, lots of people have concerns about the nutritional elements of a vegan diet. Protein is something that I get asked about all the time. Where do you get your protein? I don't know if perhaps you don't hear that in India as often, since so many people are vegetarian and you still do. But yes, I mean, really the opposite problem is the reality in the United States and in many Western countries. People are eating too much animal-based protein, and that is the underlying cause of so many health problems that are prevalent there. So yeah, in general, I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not going to go into the details. But yes, sorry.
Yeah, this is an important suggestion you've given, and yes, supplements are important if you're on a vegan diet. So lastly, now, if any of the panelists would like to ask questions to other panelists, you're free to do so. Else, I think we will wind up the session for today. All right, I think we had an absolutely engaging and informative session. I got to learn a lot from each one of you, and your insights mean a lot. Thank you, thanks to the director of CSP to have had me here today. Thank you to CSP, Indica, and all their partners, and thank you to all our panelists who took time off and engaged us in this wonderful session. Thank you.
Very much. Before we end, I would just request Sri Harikiran Madlamani, who is the founder of the Indica Academy, to just give his closing remarks. I request all of you to just be here with us for that, please. Thank you. Over to you, Hari.
Thank you very much, Akka, Sri Gurubhyo Namaha. Thank you for inviting me for this. In Advaita Vedanta, we have this concept, a prakriya called Panchakosha, wherein you reach your inner self. At Center for Soft Power and at Indica, we try to understand how does a non-Indian understand our culture? What is the access and what is the way in which they can reach our culture? So we have come up with this new theory that we're developing, which is a Panchakosha theory again, or 5-layered theory of accessing our culture. The first circle is the cuisine, is Ayurveda, is yoga, and craft. The second circle is the emotional circle, is arts, entertainment, and cultural experiences. And the third circle is the Indic knowledge systems and our history. And the fourth circle is the language. And the fifth circle is the texts, our spiritual texts, which have been handed over. So any person who wants to access our culture enters it at any level he or she can enter. But typically we found that the easier accesses are through the cuisine, through craft, through Ayurveda, through yoga, the outer circle, the body circle. And then you move to the mind circle, the emotional circle, and then the intellectual circle and the spiritual circle. I'm very, very pleased in the way this conference has been curated by Vijayalakshmi and her team, in the way the sessions have been curated. And if you see, every circle has been addressed. We had sessions on Ayurveda, we had sessions on yoga, and we had a session on cuisine, we had session on craft, and then we had session on films, we had session on Indic knowledge systems and cosmology, then we had session on Natya Shastra and Vedanta. So if you see how the progression of these sessions that have been conducted in a 5-layered fashion, it's very, very fascinating. We had more than 60 speakers, half of them non-Indians from overseas, and we had more than 10 sessions, all very well attended. And it has been a fantastic experience, so to speak. This particular festival, which is the second second time we are conducting, but if we trace back, this is the month where Soft Power, Center for Soft Power, celebrates 3 years of its existence. We started in 2018. We did a series of roundtables. We did a fantastic conference in Delhi on a conference on soft power. Then subsequently, we started a platform called Soft Power Mag, and on which we have done more than 1,000 interviews to Indophiles across the world. And then last year, we started Namaste2020. We started a conference on a festival on Ayurveda and a festival on natural heritage. And this year also we are repeating. So this is the kind of a progress that this Center for Soft Power has taken, and under the dynamic leadership of Vijayalakshmi Vijay Kumar. I mean, it's an extraordinary move that a civil society, from a movement from a civil society, from a non-governmental organization, is taking steps to promote Indian culture globally. We do hope, we are ambitious right now. Our target, we are 38, ranked 38. By 2030, we would like to be in the top 3. Of course, there are so many hurdles on the way, but we believe that the sheer strength of our timeless wisdom, we would be reaching in the top state. I would like to compliment Wendy on her focus on vegan. We ourselves at Indica and Indica Soft Power, we are focusing on vegetarian and plant-based food. We have launched a course on plant-based Ayurvedic nutrition. We're launching fellowships for encouraging plant-based chefs and entrepreneurship. So definitely the tailwind, what yoga was in the 90s and early part of this century, today veganism, vegetarianism, and plant-based food is the tailwind that and the access to the 5 layers, the access today, I would say the portal for entry into our soft power and our culture is through cuisine and is through plant-based cuisine. So thank you very much, Wendy, for being an advocate for our food, and I'm really grateful to you. I thank all the speakers over all the 10 sessions, and a fantastic panel of speakers. And of course, our dynamic team led by Vijayalakshmi Akka and her team, Arunima and Aparna and Bashra. I thank all of you. I'd also like to especially thank Aparna Sridhar, who has contributed immensely to this center. She is now moving on. I would like all of you to recognize her work, that she has done some extraordinary work for us, and we wish her all the very best for her future. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hariji. With that, we come to a close of the second edition of Namaste, the Global Utsava of Indian Soft Power. We've had wonderful sessions, as Hariji mentioned, and a lot of the speakers who were participating are those who've embraced Indian values, Indian cultural elements in their life, either as practitioners or as scholars or as entrepreneurs. Wendy just gave us an insight to it. And I think that forms a very essential part of what we call, or what we want to understand as, global citizenship, where you're embracing different ideas, different concepts, and also practicing and taking them further with you. Very few countries cultures can actually boast to be a civilizational soft power as India, and we see that influence carrying forward in Southeast Asia. A concept that involves people, that involves art, that involves values, intellectual acumen, all of those things that were highlighted right now, certainly needs a deeper understanding. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. And in the world of digital, as Dr. Tusu mentioned, communication is very important. How we communicate our soft power, the narrative that we weave around it, those things become really important. And I think that is what forums such as Namaste2021 is contributing towards. As Hariji said, there are a lot of hurdles, but I'm sure we will get there one step at a time. And with that, thank you to all the speakers today and in the past who've joined us in this endeavor. I would like to thank my colleague, Dr. Aparna Sridhar, for publishing so many brilliant articles to our audience who want to understand deeper what Indian soft power entails. Please do read her articles and other publications on indicasoftpower.com. With that, thank you so much. Namaste.
We will end with the national anthem, and I request all of you to either stand up or turn your cameras off, and still stand up, please.
जनगणमन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
Thank you. With your permission, we'll be ending the meeting now. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.